right, well, hello, everybody. It's actually not so much about polymath as just recognizing that everything that's happening today, all of these multiple crises are coming from the same source. And, well, Drew just named it, arising from what we like to call the old story, the story of separation. And by the same token, the solutions and the things that make us come alive and that call to us, those are all coming from perhaps the same wellspring as well, the same source as well, a new and ancient story of interdependency, interconnection, and interbeing. And just as Dwayne illustrated, the water table of this new story is rising. And as it rises, the water comes from many, many, many springs. It's an exciting time to be alive. I'm having, maybe we can raise the house lights just a little bit so that I can see faces a little bit better. Otherwise, I tend to get very self-centered here up on stage. So I think yeah, nice, thank you. Hi everybody. Thoreau said it takes two to speak the truth, one to speak and another to hear. And I feel much more capable of speaking the truth when I'm seeing your faces, and really I feel like then I'm part of a larger being that includes all of you and myself as well, a larger being that communicates through subtle cues, through the light in your eyes and the expression on your face and the way that you're sitting, and that's the inner, that's the neural communications of this larger being, and I'm the mouth. And if I were in a different audience, I would be a different mouth. So, yeah, there's a form of non-duality right there. So I'm going to say a few things about activism in the new story, in a story of which non-dual cosmology is a part. Our current cosmology has despair built into it. Part of our cosmology is what you could call a theory of change. It's essentially Newtonian in origin, or actually Galilean, if you want to be a stickler for details. But it says that change happens when you exert a force on a mass. Things don't just happen. The universe is kind of this big clockwork. Things don't happen spontaneously. There's no direction or purpose or intelligence in the world. Things have to be made to happen, such as when the cue ball hits the 8 ball and it changes direction, such as when gravity, a force, pulls on a mass, then something happens. But by themselves, things just kind of run along forever, changelessly. So if you want to create change in the world, then you have to be able to exert a force. And this can't just be haphazard. You have to have a plan. You have to understand these details of cause and effect. And if you do that, then you'll be able to change the world. So translate this, and this, by the way, as all of you by now are probably abundantly aware, this is an obsolete cosmology and an obsolete theory of change at the very most basic level, the quantum level. Like, actually, stuff just happens without a force being exerted. 2 uranium atoms can be just sitting there, and one of them decays and one of them doesn't. And it's not because a different force was pushing on one of them and not the other one. This is tremendously puzzling to the mind that is steeped in force-based causality, and the mind that doesn't grasp the animated quality of the universe, to the mind that thinks that all intelligence and wakefulness and design can only be imposed from the outside. It's very puzzling. So we say, well, it's just random. It happens by random. An indigenous person would probably have no problem whatsoever explaining this. They would say, well, this atom decided to decay and that one didn't, I mean, they're alive just like we are. So, but it's basically or we call it acausal, and that's perhaps closer to the truth. There's no force pushing it to happen. Okay, so anyway, obsolete cosmology, we're talking about this theory of change, but it still infuses our way of thinking about the world. It infuses our spirituality. How can we make something? How can we change ourselves? How can we somehow, standing outside of ourselves, exert a force? Just like the technologist, the engineer, or the conqueror of nature, exerting a force in changing the world. And as activists, too, we think, okay, to change the world in a big way, I have to be able to marshal lots of force, harness lots of force. I have to have a big platform. I have to raise lots of money. I have to have my video go viral. It has to be scalable. I have to do a big thing because look at the size of the problem and look at the power of the forces arrayed against us. The military, industrial, pharmaceutical, agricultural, prison, medical, educational, industrial complex. Like they have, I don't want to be rude and leave anybody out. Did I leave anyone out? Yeah, they have the force, they have the money, they have the guns, they have their surveillance state, they have the media, they have the force. So here's one little bit of the despair that I see in so many activists, this mute, sometimes it's a mute despair, and then sometimes it flares up into overwhelm and burnout. But it's the recognition that we don't have as much force at our disposal as they do. So if the matter is a contest of force, we lose. Yet the template for change that says that it's a contest of force, that's ubiquitous. We're immersed in that. Hence, we look at everything as a battle or a struggle or a fight, the fight against climate change. Guess what? If it's a fight against climate change, we lose. Isn't there another way to solve problems, to resolve crises, other than a fight? Most action movies tell us no. In an action movie, the resolution comes when the good guy defeats, utterly destroys, humiliates, usually kills the bad guy. It's in adult movies, children's movies, almost every movie, except for the Lego movie, which I thought was going to be a 2-hour toy commercial ordeal. But then at the end, spoiler alert, cover your ears. But in the end, the bad guy wins. He has the good guys totally under his power, but then he has a change of heart, and it's not resolved through force, after all. And that spoke to me. So, if we see the perpetrators of the system as irredeemable others who can only be conquered by force, we lose. But also notice that way of seeing is actually at the root of the problem. Overcoming the other. That's the template for civilization's relationship to nature. And it's also the template for racism and other kinds of oppression, which are excused by casting the victim into a less than human or less than being fully self category. So do we really think that the solution to the crisis of civilization that's generated by the story of separation will itself come from the story of separation? Or are we just recreating more of the same? Many activists ask themselves that question when they look at their own organization and they see the same violence, the same horizontal violence and the same power dynamics in their organization as they see in the larger society and the government. And this is an awakening awareness now, and people are speaking of prefigurative activism. How can we prefigure the future in our own organizations? Philip K. Dick. I have a favorite quote. It changes every few months, but now my favorite quote is, "To fight the empire is to be infected with its derangement. This is a paradox. Whoever defeats a segment of the empire becomes the empire. It proliferates like a virus, imposing its form on its enemies. Thereby, it becomes its enemies." What we're talking about here is a different approach. The cosmology that we are absorbing in this conference, the understanding not only of the cosmos, but of the self. It feeds a different story. Ultimately, it feeds different tactics and strategies for the activist that understand that this othered person, this othered executive or politician or whoever it is, they're a mirror of myself. This is part of the new and ancient story that self and world are not fundamentally separate. This person is a mirror of myself. All of my shadow, all of my glory is mirrored in this person, including my love of this planet. And that this person's deep yearnings are the same as mine. I'm not going to go into too much detail, or maybe any detail, about how to translate that into activist strategy and tactics, but when we see the world through those eyes, different approaches to solving problems suggest themselves. Okay, so that's not it for the despair, though. But for one thing, yeah, just to recognize that the despair comes from the same place that our crisis comes from. That's important. Another piece of the despair comes from another plank, another thread of the old story, which casts us as separate individuals in a world of other, casts us as, skin-encapsulated egos or little bubbles of psychology bouncing around. And there's another bubble of psychology. Hello. And so in that perception, you're just one little individual, so nothing you do matters very much. You can recycle all of your whiskey bottles or throw them in the landfill. Which do you do with your whiskey bottles? You can do it either way. That was supposed to be a joke. You can do it either way, but it doesn't really matter that much because even if you ride your bicycle everywhere and take 30-second showers with cold water and eat roots and berries and dumpster dive, even if you do that diligently, if no one else does that, if no one else changes, it doesn't matter. And if you live a profligate lifestyle, like Donald Trump, and have gold fixtures on your yacht and fly first class everywhere and are as ecologically insensitive as possible, that won't matter either if everybody else wakes up. So what you do doesn't matter. And how do we grapple with this? Well, one way is to say, okay, yes, but I am ethical, so I must live as if it mattered. I must live in a way such that if everybody lived in that way, we would have a more beautiful world. But there's still that secret knowledge from the stance of separation, from the story of separation. There's still that secret knowledge, well, guess what? I'm not everybody. I'm not everybody, I'm just me. So what does it matter? There's a sense of futility that often morphs then into indignation, anger, resentment, and sanctimoniousness. Sanctimoniousness, or is the word sanctimony, self-righteousness, that is detectable. It gives off an odor that repels those who might otherwise be drawn in. And again, we can see how this plays out in the environmental movement and the social justice movements. And really, the motivation then becomes, really underneath that, that kind of ethical stance is, if I do this, if I recycle my whiskey bottles, if I go to the protest march, if I do these things, then I am a good person because I'm on the right side. I'm doing something about it. And I get to like myself. And that is also coming from one of the wounds of the old story, the wound of self-rejection. Acting from the old story, are we going to create anything other than more of the old story? What we will create, I'm like painting a pretty extreme picture here. I don't think any actual activist is primarily motivated by wanting to like themselves and look good, but to the extent that that motivation is present, and I know that it's been present for me in my work, to the extent that it's present, then guess what we will achieve? We will achieve the self-image of being a good person. What we will not achieve is any actual change in the world. To achieve that, perhaps we need to offer a sacrifice. To sacrifice being right. To sacrifice being good. Being right is a very strongly ingrained habit. I learned it in school, that if I produce the correct answer, things change, good things happen. So here we can come to a conference and get up on stage and produce the correct answer, provide the correct information, offer a template or a map. Here's how to do it, a plan. And again, that draws from that Newtonian understanding of how change happens. But I think we are now entering a phase, Drew referred to it in Thomas Berry's words, I call it a space between stories, where we do not know how change happens, really. And we see that it's a mystery. And that tiny actions, invisible, private choices, have a strange way of kind of tugging a subterranean thread of causality that causes big changes in a totally unexpected way in the future. Whereas the big things somehow don't have the effects that we anticipated or that we hoped for. And that there is perhaps a larger intelligence that's in charge here. The idea that our private choices have cosmic significance, that one way to frame it is that God sees everything. That idea seemed irrational in the old story. It seemed profoundly unscientific. And that set up a conflict between science and spirituality, and therefore between activism and spirituality too. Now we are understanding, we are taking on a new story in which it's no longer unscientific, because if every part is a holographic image of the whole, then any change to any part corresponds to a change in the whole. Rupert Sheldrake articulates this really beautifully in the theory of morphic resonance that says any change that happens in one place creates a field of change that allows the same change to happen more easily somewhere else. But I have another way of looking at it, and I want to address this kind of feeling of futility and despair that comes from I'm just one separate individual. What I do cannot possibly matter. We need another reason. Another reason to do these things. Besides, it's going to somehow make a difference on the grand scheme of things. Another reason, another map, another compass to follow. One time, years and years ago, this is 10 years ago, I was fighting with my wife. Big arguments. In my memory, she was doing most of the shouting. But one time, I had a story that said she was emotionally abusive and so on and so forth. And anyway, one time I couldn't take it anymore. And I left the house, probably slammed the door, went for a walk. And I'm like, I'm done trying to make peace. I'm done trying to make this work. I'm just going to go nuclear. I'm going to let her have it. I'm not going to hold back. I'm not going to restrain myself. And boy, that felt good. But then, like this kind of calm but very serious knowing came over me that if I went nuclear, there would be nuclear war on this planet. Because I was making a declaration and a prayer and a choice of the nature of the universe. And so I went back, I didn't go nuclear, and here we are today. No, just kidding. But this is actually a paradox, because it's not saying that my choice and not yours has kept us still alive and still hopeful today. And that paradox is irresolvable when we see ourselves as separate. But I will offer this to you as that other reason to be an activist. And this could mean a big activist. I'm not devaluing the big picture political action. And I'm not saying to do the small personal things as a substitute for that. I'm saying that they all come from the same place. They all come from the same place of trust. And fundamentally, in order to really change the world, they have to be arising from a different story and a different motivation. So, my time is up, and I will just leave you with one little thing. Just my appreciation for this conference, actually. Part of this rising water table of a new story. Offering us reason to live prayerfully, to live as if each choice and each action were a declaration of who you are and what world you want to live in, and a declaration that is heard, that is received, offering us an intellectual framework in which that knowing is no longer irrational. Here we have the reunion of heart and mind. Thank you.